This is episode number 24 with David Nolan. Welcome to the Doc Fitness podcast, where it's all about developing your mindset, training and nutritional knowledge so you can lose body fat and build muscle effectively while still living a real life. I am your host, David O'Connor. Now let's get into the show. How are we keeping, guys? And a big welcome back to the Doc Fitness podcast. And today I have Mr. David Nolan back on the show. And if you've been a long time listener, David was with us on episode 10, roughly around this time last year actually, where we dive into everything kind of around supplements for health and kind of fat loss, and basically like the basic fundamentals of what you need to know when it comes to supplements. So if you haven't gone through that episode, just make sure you give it a look over too. I'll pop it in the show notes for this episode as well. But David is also a podcast host. He's an online coach. He's the owner of Synapse Performance, and he's recently become the head of performance at the Rugby Academy Ireland as well. So it's great to get him back on the show to dive into a topic that I kind of seen pop up on my radar recently in relation to an article that David wrote around this thing called the Calorie-Quality Continuum, which is basically the way people view food now in terms of healthy versus unhealthy, good versus bad, and then giving you a new perspective way to view that, so you're not putting any kind of negative connotations around it and you don't see food as good or bad. So although it's not as easy as just kind of telling you that, okay, no bad food exists, you need to really understand why no bad food exists, or that no real foods are bad in isolation or unhealthy in isolation, because you need to take so many other factors into account. So with that, I'm sure you're going to get a lot of takeaways from this episode. I really enjoyed recording it. There's a lot of stuff in here, and hopefully you'll leave with a definite understanding on what the Calorie-Quality Continuum is, so you can just enjoy your food more. So without further ado, let's get dived in. So Dave, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back, Dave. Obviously, I didn't embarrass myself too badly the last time that I've been kindly asked back again, so thank you.
I think in my head I'd planned to get you on sooner, but I was checking the date there. It's nearly a full year since you were on for episode 10, where we're talking about supplements for health and fat loss and muscle gain goals and stuff like that. So time is certainly flying.
Yeah, it's a quick year, my man.
And what have you been up to yourself, Dave, since then? How's studies and everything going?
Not going too bad, I suppose. Last time I was on, I can't remember if I was in UCD at the time, but my nutrition research has finished up in UCD, so I finished up there at the end of August. So now at the moment I am sitting down today writing some research proposals, looking for kind of the next project, something that'll excite me, and outside that still coaching, and most recently took up head of strength and conditioning at Rugby Academy Ireland. So they're the kind of main things that are keeping me busy coaching, looking for the next research area that'll excite me.
Okay, brilliant. And yeah, are you staying, what is the plan with the research? Do you plan on staying in academia,
Well, it'll be academic based research, yeah. So hopefully, depending on whether people will be willing to fund my research, we'll go into either another year as a research coordinator, or hopefully maybe progress that onto PhD studies, depending on if I can get someone to pay me to do research.
Hint, hint.
Yeah.
No, brilliant. And Dave, I know we're chatting on air about this, and I was explaining to you, but just for our listeners, I was saying how I wanted to get across an episode of something that comes up an awful lot personally for us every single week, whether it's in the gym. I was just saying to you this morning, I had 2 chats with 2 different lads in the gym this morning about this, and even with my online clients, it's always something that they classify food into. So bad is another massive word, healthy versus unhealthy, good versus bad. I had a bad week, I had a bad meal, I had a bad day, and then the weekend went to shit. All this kind of stuff that we see it every day really, and I want to kind of flip the lid on the perspective around that. I came across the Calorie-Quality Continuum, as you're called it, the blog that you put up in the post you put up on Instagram, and it just fits absolutely perfect for what I want to get across. So, first question I have for you is, why is good versus bad, or healthy versus unhealthy, a flawed way to look at food?
Firstly, like most places that people make mistakes, be it as coaches or as trainees, gym goers, this kind of thing, it's looking at things, making assumptions without having the full context. So a lot of time when we make mistakes, it's due to a lack of context. And I suppose nutrition is an interesting science where it's the only strand of science where people kind of self-identify and become emotionally involved in the thing. So as humans, we love to put things into nice little neat boxes and into camps. So good and evil. We see this throughout all of history in all domains. You have good and evil, good and bad, healthy, unhealthy. And I suppose from a cognitive perspective, it's very simple just to not think about it, put things into a nice little box and, oh, that's good, that's bad. So then we don't have to think about it and we can label things and there's no ambiguity there that people don't get confused. But when it comes to food and nutrition, we can't just look at things as good and bad or unhealthy or healthy because it doesn't appreciate the context of the given situation. And I suppose what I mean by that is food is very dynamic. It can be good or bad or positive or negative depending on the given situation. And within that article, the example I gave is if you had people and you asked the majority of people to take, for example, say nuts, so a handful of almonds and a bowl of Fruit Loops. So you know that American shitty cereal is pretty much just sugar in a bowl. And if you ask people, okay, which of these is healthy and which of these is unhealthy, the majority of people say, oh, nuts, yeah, good, clean, wholesome food, that's healthy. Fruit Loops, bad, you can't eat that. But what I would tend to flip that, if someone, say, for example, is eating nuts, a handful of nuts, and that handful of nuts is what causes them to go into a caloric surplus, so taking more food than what they need, and that drives excessive fat gain, weight gain, and pushes them, say, over time, by eating these nuts, push them more and more into the obese realm with their body composition. Well, then, in that perspective, nuts are not a healthy food or not a positive food, but rather they're contributing to the diet in a negative way because they're having negative health outcomes from that. And conversely, if you have, say, Fruit Loop, which most people say are innately bad, it can never be good. Well, say if you have someone that's trying to lose weight, that's obese and is trying to reduce their body fat, and then they struggle really bad with sugar cravings and they like sweet foods. Now, if we allow that person to have a small bowl of Fruit Loops, say, every evening, and because they're eating those Fruit Loops, they don't binge during the rest of the day or they don't overeat the other day, they're able to better adhere to their calorie deficit. Well, in that perspective, this bowl of pure sugar, highly processed breakfast cereal is actually having a positive effect in the diet and that person's health because it's allowing them to adhere better. So there you've foods that in one perspective, like nuts for plenty of people are a healthy component of the diet because they don't overeat. So they stay at, say, maintenance calories and they perform while they're getting in their proteins, all vegetables, this kind of stuff. And nuts are included along that. Where for another person, they could have a negative consequence because they drive fat gain. And conversely, Fruit Loops can be negative if people are overeating them and they're causing fat gain from that. Or they can be positive if they allow someone to adhere better to their diet long term. So to label things healthy or unhealthy just shows kind of naivety and a lack of appreciation of context. Because the messages I want to get through from that article, if there was two things you need to take away, it's first of all, there's no such thing as a good or bad food. It's how these foods are consumed in the context of the overall diet that determines whether it contribute in either a positive or negative way to an individual's health or body composition goals. And then we can touch on it later on. The other message of that was that the idea of calories and food quality are not mutually exclusive concepts. It's not that you just focus on one or the other. It's calorie intake and food quality are both important. So I'm not going to ramble anymore, Dave. I think that kind of covers, or at least I hope answers the question you posed.
Yes. No, it gets into especially the healthy versus the unhealthy, because I think that's a big topic that people can't or just don't even try to wrap their head around at times, because no one thinks on the level that me and you might think about food, so that it's easy for them to select these kind of generic answers or believe these generic ways. All right, that's unhealthy, that's healthy, that's it, black and white, done. But you're just showing the deeper kind of realm to that. The good versus the bad, then, Dave, as well, I think we might touch on that a little bit more before we go any further, because there's a lot of negative association related with labelling foods as bad. Is there anything you want to expand on maybe there with that?
Yeah, I think to put these kind of personal traits on food is a bit crazy. You're never going to get a piece of food that's going to take out a switchblade and stab you or shank you. Like the idea of putting the idea that food can have this equality that we put with individuals is bad. I think it's a bad way to get in to start looking at food. And like on the extreme end of things, you can get down to a very orthorexic way of thinking where certain foods are bad. You should never eat them under any circumstances. And I think that is from, say, just someone's emotional and mental health or mental attitudes towards food. It's not a good way of thinking because it takes away the enjoyment of food. It takes away the hedonic factors of food because we eat food for much more than simply energy. Like I hate when I see these people say, oh, your body is a car, or, you know, it's an engine. You should only put good quality fuel in your engine. You know, food is only fuel. That's complete bullshit. Food is not only fuel. If that was the case, we'd simply, you know, bland protein and drink oil and then eat pure table sugar or rice or whatever it may be. We eat foods for so much more than just the fuel to provide us. We eat them, if we think of the hedonic nature of food, we eat food for social situations, for the enjoyment of food. And then for flavour and texture, we actually enjoy flavour and texture. So if you label food as bad, then that puts a kind of emotional level of guilt or something on you if you consume that food, so you enjoy it. Like, people call pizza a bad food, but I know personally, I love pizza. And I'm don't ever feel guilty about eating pizza. Where you have other people that they eat the food, the pizza that they deem bad, but then they get into this cycle of guilt afterwards. And then on the extreme case of things, you can see them doing excessive amount of cardios or restricting food at other times in an unhealthy way. Like, I have no issue with restricting intake. Say if someone's going out for a big meal in the evening, that they restrict their intake for breakfast and lunch. That's just clever control of your caloric intake. But it's about doing that in, I suppose, a detached way, that you're not emotionally invested in that process, as in you view food for what it is. So say, for example, if I'm going out for a meal in the evening and I know I'm going to be taking in quite a high calorie dense meal, say a 3-course meal in a restaurant in the evening, I will restrict food intake for breakfast and lunch, strip it down to basically usually only proteins and vegetables to allow for that in the evening. Now, I can do that because essentially I'm emotionally detached from my food choices. I view them in a rational and logical way, where you have other people will restrict that food in the morning, but might even fast for the whole day. And it's not from a logical way where, like, okay, I'm going to eat this many calories, therefore I'll balance it out this, where they could restrict for that day and then they could restrict food for 2-3 days afterwards unnecessarily because they feel that guilt and shame because they have this negative association with good and bad foods. So I hope that kind of makes sense. To view food as good or bad is naive. Food can be good and or bad depending on the context of the given situation, but there is no one food that under no circumstances you shouldn't eat.
Yes.
Except maybe kale. I think you have quite a big issue with kale. I don't think you would recommend
rocket.
Kale. Rocket. That's it. Rocket.
Oh my god, I hate this stuff. I don't know. I don't know if it's just me, but I get such a pang off it. Like when I have it.
I love rocket. Now my go-to breakfast would be poached egg, smoked salmon, and rocket. That would be one of my go-to breakfasts now.
It's
a lovely combination. Yeah.
I don't know if you're trying to get the miss out of me. No,
I'm dead serious. I think it's lovely. It goes lovely with a bit of hollandaise sauce and poached egg. Absolutely lovely.
I don't know. It must be me because every time I eat it, I get like a crazy aftertaste off it that I just absolutely I don't understand how people can consume it. Like, I think it's that bad. Kale is okay. Like, it's just plain. It's just, unless you throw it into a smoothie or something else, I'll eat it. Like, but I'd never eat kale inside the plate. Like, just kale, you know. So yeah, no, that's a good.
I think this again shows the idea. Like, people forget that there is a certain degree of inter-individual differences when it comes to actual taste perception and how we taste food. So you could be one of these people that gets a much more bitter taste from rocket, say, than I do. My taste buds mightn't be that way tuned that you get the taste. But like that, for you, is rocket a good food to try force into your diet? Probably not, because you don't consume it very nice. You don't derive pleasure from the consuming that. So for you, it's a bad food. For me, it's a good food in the context of my diet.
Exactly. Again, maybe then it's not bad. It's just that I don't like the fucking thing, so I'm not going to have it. I wouldn't say it's a bad. Do you know what I mean? So it's funny because you said that as well.
To label the foods like that is just, I suppose if you want to get technical as a coach, what you'd say, you have foods that are more appropriate or more conducive to the given context at that given time. That foods, like there's certain foods that at certain times they're more appropriate. Like if I have someone that is in contest prep that is very close stepping on stage to getting the ultra lean levels of body fat, are hyper palatable high energy foods best for these people? Probably not. Like if you have someone that's on 1200 calories a day or 1300 calories a day, are you going to really waste 600 calories in 2 or 3 slices of pizza for that person, where they could fill out that 600 calories with more voluminous food, vegetables, meats, that kind of thing, where in that given situation, the main thing you're trying to overcome is their hunger, their drive for hunger, and the body's drive to consume foods that will drive their body fat back up. So for them, in that situation, it's not that pizza is a bad food, it's just less appropriate or less conducive to progress for that given context. And that the other foods that allow them to eat more and become more satiated are more appropriate for that given context. But again, if they're then switch to an off season and there's someone that is trying to gain weight, struggles to gain weight, well then switch into these more hyperpalatable foods, the ones that allow you to get in a lot of calories easy because they're easy to consume, they're more appropriate for that given context. And if you someone that really struggles with poor appetite and can't gain weight, and you're shoveling just down a lot of just potatoes, these kind of things that for their satiating properties don't provide you that much energy, it's what most people call a healthy food or a good food, but in that situation, it's probably not the most context appropriate food for that given person and their given goals.
Yes, exactly. I think people believe that, okay, because this is healthy and it's on a meal plan I got off someone online or a PDF, that I have to eat the fucking thing. I remember back in the day when I kind of first, I purchased some online meal plan and training plan thing. Probably about seven, maybe even more, 8 years ago. And within that meal plan was a lot of cottage cheese. And I have a very similar relationship with cottage cheese that I do with Rocket. Like, I absolutely despise the stuff. Whereas my partner Kate can eat it plain out of the jar. I'm like, how? Like, you know, it's... I remember I used to have to try and force myself to eat it. And I used to put peanut butter in the fucking thing to make it palatable. But... yeah, I did that for a long time, like, until I realised I don't need to be doing this. You know, it's funny how, and people are like, I see young lads doing that now. I see 16, 17, 18-year-olds going through that because they don't know any better, or they might be reading it online somewhere or whatnot. And hopefully this episode will kind of shine a light on that too. Like, it's, look, if you don't like cottage cheese or Rocket, you don't have to eat cottage cheese or Rocket.
Oh, cottage cheese is, for me, it's a crutch for me. I took part in a research study once, and it involved a couple of muscle biopsies, a few resistance training sessions, but as part of it, we were looking at the effect of different whey protein forms on muscle recovery and muscle function. But as part of that, I had my food prescribed for me for 12 days. So food was packaged and completely pre-prepared, and I had to consume this diet. But the dietitian that designed it was very exact with the calorie and protein intake too. Like, I remember one day my diet for my dessert was Toblerone, and I was like, oh great, I get a Toblerone. I took out the triangle, so it was one triangle of Toblerone, but the pointy bit at the top had been shaved down to about half a triangle, so it was that kind of precise. But one of the snacks one night was toast with cottage cheese, and I remember it was one slice of bread that was, the crust was cut off it, and it was cut, I got about 3/4 of a slice of bread with the crust cut off it, but then the guts of maybe 150, 200 grams of cottage cheese that I had to just consume. So I was pretty much just eating cottage cheese plain, and I'd never eaten the food before. And I remember sitting there and with a glass of water and every kind of spoonful in, swishing around and swallowing, just trying to force it down. It is, and like that, I've seen it prescribed by so many people as a great protein source or whatever, which it is, but my God, I cannot stomach cottage cheese anymore. And like that, unfortunately, we do see people doing this, as you say, young guys that are forcing foods into them that they don't like because they think it's food that they must eat because it's been prescribed to them or some trainer told them that they have to do it. So these ideas that there's any one food that you have to eat or any food that you should never eat, it's complete bullshit.
Yeah, I understand cottage cheese is super cheap and it's low calorie and it's high protein. But if you hate it, you don't need to eat it. That's the kind of main takeaway, I suppose.
Oh, definitely.
And Dave, we kind of dived into the healthy versus the unhealthy, good versus bad, and kind of the repercussions of that. And I know, like, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, right? Because I know there will be some people listening to this that may be viewing certain foods as good and bad right now, and they might still binge a little bit, but that could be a much deeper issue for that person as well than just how they view food. There could be a lot of other kind of mental stuff there and emotional eating stuff that kind of is obviously way outside the scope of this episode. Like, so don't think that just because you know this, it might solve things for you. There's often with a lot of people too that find the very kind of strict and unhealthy relationships with food that it can stem from stuff that's gone on, you know, numerous different stuff that's gone on years ago or whatever it might be. But it's just kind of, I suppose, I don't want to ignore that point either with this episode. And if you've anything to add to that, feel free.
No, definitely not. Because obviously food consumption and that kind of thing, these kind of systematic binging or overeating on it, the idea when we see people, and it annoys me when to see obesity or being overweight labelled as just a one issue subject where people like sugar intake is the problem or fat intake or this kind of thing. That, to be honest, that argument is just naive and quite ignorant in my perspective. Nutrition or obesity is quite a multifactorial, multifaceted issue that it's not one sole purpose that drives obesity. And this on a population level. I'll get on to an individual level in a sec. And I think what a lot of that drives it, any of us in nutrition, we want to be able to single out and factor a nutritional component because we say, okay, if we can get people eating less sugar, it'll solve it. Or if we can get people eating less fat, it'll solve the obesity issue. And I think our egos sometimes drive that because it's hard to accept that maybe obesity is not a question that nutritional science is going to answer, but rather some interesting arguments can be made around the kind of socioeconomic and economic policies and international level marketing strategies and their effects on global obesity, and whether it's not an issue for nutritional science to solve out, but rather it's a socioeconomic thing that has to be done at a governmental level, whether that it's a totally different debate and it's an interesting conversation. But then I think at an individual level, as you said, we can't disregard people being overweight as simply a lack of knowledge. We both personally, I know a lot of people, you know a lot of people who are top level coaches, you can say, and struggle with their weight or quite overweight. Some of the most intelligent people I know in terms of exercise nutritional science are overweight themselves. So it's not that they don't understand calorie balance or they don't understand these elements we're talking about. You can understand this stuff inside and out and still struggle to apply it or consistently apply it yourself. Like, if knowledge was the only thing that ensured you were ripped and lean, like every lecturer, every professor you see in university would pretty much be shredded. But they're not. So this idea that once you know this information, that you're just magically going to reach all your goals, that again is naive. And as you said, Dave, correctly, it is much more complex than that and can be much more complex. There is for people that just simply don't understand energy balance and portion control, and once that clicks with them, everything falls into place. But as you said, there are people there, and I won't ever belittle that like nutrition at a fundamental level is very simple. It's a numbers game and very simple in terms of you've got to maintain your energy balance, hit your protein intake, and hit your vegetable intake and whatnot. So it is very simple, but the consistent application of these principles is much more complex and nuanced than that. And it's how we can drive behavior change and consistent behavior change is the issue. It's not getting people to understand the fundamentals of nutrition. That's a stepping stone, but then you have to continually drive behavior change, and that's something that's much more complex and again much more beyond even my scope to talk about at a high kind of fundamental level. If it's someone that's overeating and it's stemming from deep psychological issues or emotional trauma in the past, that is beyond your scope of practice in most cases, and sometimes you will have to recommend that people sort out that kind of stuff. And even if someone's a bit overweight and dealing with that kind of trauma, Is our priority to get the weight down? Probably not. Our priority is probably to get that person to a much more emotionally stable and happy place in terms of their mental health. And then once they're there, then we'll worry about getting rid of those few extra pounds that they have.
100%. Yep. No, it's something that I think needs to be made more aware for people, because they might be reading they might be listening to podcasts, reading articles or whatever it is, thinking that they know a lot of stuff, but they just can't do it or they can't make it stick. And it's like that. It's not as easy as reading or listening to this podcast and going away and doing it. And we want people to kind of understand that too. But again, I don't want to take away from the content in this episode as well. So I want to acknowledge that, but now we'll keep moving forward, Dave, to kind of the second half of this episode, which I want you to kind of go through, I suppose, the new way to view food, or a new perspective on viewing food. And that is, we kind of touched on it in bits and bobs, but maybe just, Dave, I think, to explain the calorie-quality continuum kind of graphic that you have, because if we can kind of break this down and help people visualize it in this episode, I think it'll be a huge takeaway for them once you go through the quadrants of it you've done. So, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, so I got thinking a while back about this, and I seen all the same messages on Instagram, all these echo chamber that's turned into about calorie balance and good and bad foods and all these kind of things, which I don't have an issue with. That the more that message gets out to people, the better. But from my perspective, I like thinking of things in novel ways and thinking about the nuances and appreciating the nuance. And from that, I started thinking about this idea where I've seen people labeling food as good or bad, and again, it annoys me because it's like we can't put food on simple boxes. I was like, everything lies upon a spectrum. Usually, most things we see, it lies upon some sort of continuum or spectrum. So I devised this graph, and I remember I was training with Danny Lennon of Senior Nutrition one day, and I showed him the graph, and I was like, what do you think of this idea? And Danny really liked it, and I was like, just can't name the fucking thing now. And Danny, the nutritional expert he is, turned to me, he's like, how about the Calorie-Quality Continuum? I was like, I like that. So the name of it goes to Danny Lennon, the credit. So basically, what I have done, it is a 2-axis graph. So it's a continuum. So on our x-axis, so if you're looking at the graph that goes, or the line that goes from left to right along the bottom of the graph, that is our calorie density. So on the left hand, you have things that are very low calorie density. So calorie density means the amount of calories per gram of food. So if you have food that you can take in a lot of grams with 0 calories, then that is a low calorie dense food. For example, Monster Zero, 500 mils, 500 grams for 0 calories in terms of liquid. Jelly, it's say 6 calories for a whole tub of jelly or whatever it is. So they're low calorie foods. I'd even go to say that they're inert foods that cause little to no physiological responses within the body to simply pass through. Then on the other end of the spectrum, as you go up, the calorie density increases. So you have, at the top end, you have your Cokes, full sugar Cokes, crisps, all these things that people would quote unquote call junk food from McDonald's, where you have a lot of calories packed into small, usually hyper palatable foods. And then on the left hand of the graph, so the y-axis goes from bottom to up, that looks at food in terms of their quality, food quality. So I label that as the micronutrient density. So how much vitamins and minerals are they providing to our diet? So from that, we can split the quadrant into 5 sections. So as I said, you have the bottom left-hand quadrant, which are pretty much your inert foods. You have your jellies, your Pepsi Maxes, these kind of things where no real calories in them, but then no real nutritional value in them as well. So they're not offering you much in the way of essential vitamins and minerals. We go right then to the bottom right-hand quadrant where we're up with foods that are high calorie dense foods and still offer very little in the way of vitamins and minerals. So your junk foods, your sweets, your Big Macs, these kind of things, like, yeah, you're getting a lot of energy in there, high calorie dense, but you're getting very little in terms of vitamins and minerals. So then if I go back to the left-hand side of the graph, but towards the top left-hand quadrant, you have foods that are low calorie and micronutrient dense. So your fruits and vegetables, that you're getting a lot of food volume and weight for very little calories. But on the top of that, you're getting a shit ton of vitamins, minerals. And then across from that, on the top right hand of the graph, you have foods which are high calorie dense but also offer a decent levels of vitamins and minerals. So your avocados, your nuts, these kind of things, these healthy foods that people view them as, but are quite calorie dense. And then I put protein sources as kind of right in the middle of that graph as a fifth quadrant, right in the middle, because protein sources are a different kettle of fish, really, when we're thinking of the overall context of the diet. It's much more nuanced macronutrient. So we put that in the middle, and within that, like, protein sources can vary in terms of their micronutrient, or I should say their energy density. As in, you can have prawns that are very high protein, very low calorie, or you can have a big lump of steak, which a lot of protein, but then also brings a lot of calories from its other sources, mainly its fat. So they're the main sections the foods are going to fall into. And from that, there are foods, every food can then be placed somewhere on that graph based upon, one, their calorie density, and two, their micronutrient density. So they can be placed somewhere along that spectrum. Now, not every food will fall into a distinct quadrant. These foods, some foods can straddle these quadrants where, you know, there's moderate level of calorie density, and yeah, there's some degree of vitamins and minerals, but they're not packed full of vitamins or minerals. So that's how you view the quadrants. And I suppose the argument then comes, well, what type of food should we be eating? And generally, you're going to bias yourself towards the left-hand side of that graph, and even the left upper-hand side. You know, the majority of your food in an ideal world is going to come from fruits, vegetables, mainly those lean protein sources, and then a handful of your more nutrient or high energy dense, micronutrient dense foods, or your nuts, your avocados, these kind of things. So in the ideal world, that's where you'd bias yourself. All your foods would fall on that level of the graph. But we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a practical world where we have to be pragmatic. In an ideal world, would we be chugging Pepsi Max and Energy Monster, the zero calorie monster? Probably not in an ideal world. I think the evidence is pretty strong that artificial sweeteners have pretty much an inert relationship. Now, it's not saying that they're anyway healthy for you, or I don't like to use that term, or they have innate kind of health benefiting properties, which they don't. They're pretty much an inert food. So from that context, but they allow people to adhere better to their diet. They allow people to curb sugar cravings through jelly or Monster or Pepsi Max, these kind of things. So they're not a bad addition. And then the bottom right hand stuff, they're kind of your junk food, what you'd call it. In an ideal world, we wouldn't eat it, but again, we can't disregard the hedonic natures of eating, that people eat for enjoyment. So the inclusion of these foods in a balanced and moderated way in the diet is not going to have any issue. Just once you understand that they're probably not the best food to be eating all the time, because we had that fad where if it fits your macros came up and people were like, look, food quality is not important. You can eat ice cream and Big Macs all the time. Once you're hitting your protein and calories, it doesn't matter. And from a body composition perspective, it doesn't really matter that much. You're going to get pretty much the same body composition results, give or take. You can do it from eating purely shit food. But from a performance and a health food, things like micronutrients are quite important. Vitamins and minerals are quite important to take into the diet. So the idea that, if it fits your macros, once you're hitting your calories and proteins, nothing else matters, that's naive. But then the other side, you have people like, look, just eat clean foods, unprocessed foods. That's the thing. Doesn't matter about how much of them you eat. You can eat as much of them as you like once you're a clean food. Again, that doesn't appreciate the nuances of calorie density and energy balance. So that's why I wanted to get this message across, that it's not a one or the other. It's not, again, people splitting things into boxes where one box, one camp is saying focus on calories and protein, that's all that matters, and the other camp is saying focus on good quality foods, high micronutrient dense food, and don't worry about calories and protein and that kind of stuff. Both of those are right and wrong at the same time. As with most things, the most sensible answer to that question lies in the middle, where yes, we need to respect energy balance and protein intake, but we also need to respect micronutrient intake and food quality. So it's not that they're mutually exclusive concepts. They're not. They're intertwined things that one affects the other. We should be hitting appropriate protein and calorie level intakes, but we should be doing that while appreciating that we need a lot of high quality micronutrient dense foods in the diet that are going to aid metabolic function and just general health. So again, I feel like I've been rambling again, but I hope that kind of explains my ideas around that concept, Dave. And if you have any questions, please shoot at me where you'd like me to clarify.
I think first I might recap it, Dave, to bring it back into just easy to understand again, because there is a lot of information there. Obviously when people see the graph, and I can put that in the show notes, they'll understand this a little bit better. But essentially, you have five main bullet points if you want to look at this in their heads. And the first one is, we'll just say veggies. So it's low calorie density, and it is high in nutrients, micronutrient dense. So low calorie, high nutrient. The next one then is avocados and nuts, for example. High calorie, nutrient dense also. So that's a very, very easy way to understand it. So you have the veggies, low calories but high in nutrients. Then you have avocados, nuts type foods where they are high calorie but also high in nutrient. Then we come down to the next step, which is low calorie foods, but there might be feck all nutrients in them. So this is where you're on about the cans of Monster, Diet Cokes, Pepsi Maxes, the low calorie jellies, all this kind of stuff. Then, and we know those are safe to consume within the diet as long as you're not having something like, what is it? No, you're never even going to come close to having, based on what we know now, enough aspartame to kill you or have adverse health.
Oh yeah, it's crazy amounts of intake you need to have an adverse health based on current level of understanding.
Yes, and I don't think we won't get into that rabbit hole right now. But the last one then is your burgers, chips, whatever, sweets, chocolate, whatnot. High calorie foods, so high calorie density foods, but also lacking nutrients as well. So it's very simple to understand. The last one then you said about the protein, because protein kind of lies in the middle, it's kind of like moderate calories, moderate calorie density, and then it's nutrient dense as well. So as I said, people will understand that. If you're listening to this, you're a bit confused by all that. You'll understand it more once you see the graph. But then once you know that, as you said, it's kind of finding the blend of the two. We want to be healthy, but if we want to drop fat, it's to know that, right, I can have the cans of Monster or the Diet Cokes if I want them. I can have the burger and chips if I want. But again, I need to respect energy balance, because if I just have those while ignoring that, I could be over that energy balance equation, which means I won't lose body fat. And if you're doing the dog and all together, you might start to have adverse health effects because of that. So it's not as easy as hit your macros, hit your calories, whatever it is, but we're trying to find the blend of it too. And I think the question, Dave, that popped into my head from that, right, I'm trying to be healthy. I know I can have my bit of chocolate every fucking day if I wanted. I know I could fit in maybe a pizza, a half pizza once or twice a week. Where's the line that we draw, Dave? Like, do you think in that? Do you have any kind of, I know we run by guidelines for our members, but do you have any kind of rough it's kind of a tricky slope to go down, but if you have any kind of rough, let's say, I know you can't really give generic ones, but if you have any rough guideline for this kind of stuff, how much is too much?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Again, obviously you said it's very context specific and individual specific, but I think what we've heard for a long time, these kind of generic things people throw off, 80-20 rule, these kind of things, that's not a bad way of thinking. Like, if you are getting 80% of your diet from minimally processed, high quality, nutrient dense fruits, vegetables, protein sources, some whole grains, these kind of things, if that comprises 80% of your meals, so if you're eating 3 times a day and let's say 4 times a day, 7 days a week, 28 meals per week, if 80% of those, or what's that? That's 3, say 21 or whatever. Again, that's probably not 80%. Say 21, 22. If 21, 22 of those meals are fairly decent, that the majority of food in them is high quality, and then you have 5 or 6 meals in that week that are, not maybe as well. There's a bit more kind of what you might view as poor quality food choices. That's not a bad way of thinking. So 80%, 20% is a good way of thinking about it. Then outside that, I suppose, when is too much is when you start seeing negative effects. I suppose that's the most pragmatic way. Is like, when am I going over? When have I starting to take the piss here that I'm going a bit too much to the junk food side of things or the less appropriate side of things? And I suppose that's when you start seeing negative effects. So if you're on weight loss, you start to see weight gain again, or if it's body composition, the body composition not going away, or if it's performance based, your performance starting to suffer. So that kind of self-auditing, like in terms of when I talk to both recreational people, recreational gym goers, and even say my rugby guys, these kind of things, said, look, the best way you can do it, any of your meals, without thinking, like obviously if someone wants to track and be that kind of way, that's great. You know, if someone's precise, we can be much more precise. And there is situations where call for that. But the majority of people, do they need to track all the time? No, not at all. If you are someone that is really susceptible to overeating and your diet has a lot of these kind of micronutrient dense or micronutrient poor foods, these kind of junk foods you'd call them, and you tend to overeat a lot, well then tracking for you might be a good idea if you want to keep eating a lot of those foods, because they're hyperpalatable and it's easy to overconsume. But for majority of people, if you're looking at performance and health, if you are eating say 3 or 4 meals a day, whatever it may be, if you kind of construct those meals in a clever way where you say to yourself, okay, first thing, am I getting sufficient protein in this meal? So what's my protein source going to be? Make sure you're hitting your sufficient protein. That's going to vary for people. It could be anywhere from 25 grams, say, up to 40, 50 grams in a meal, depending on the context. Could be even outside that, above or below. But so the first thing, pick your protein source. Do I have enough of that on the plate? Great, that's checked off. Okay, what are going to be my carbohydrate source or whatever it may be? Depending on, that's your goals then as well. So if you're having your potatoes, your rices, your pastas, whatever it may be, understanding first what an actual portion size of those foods is very important, what a portion is, and then how much portions do I need? So is it a training day? Is it a period of high levels of training overall? Or is it a couple of days of light training, I've no matches coming up, I'm not training today? Well, then you can reduce your portion size on that day. You don't need as much. It's kind of fuel for the work required. So once you put those down, then you just fill up the plate. Right, let's fill the rest of the plate with fruits, vegetables, all that kind of stuff. If you can do that for the majority of your meals, and then once or twice in the week or once a day you're putting in and not taking the piss with the amount you're eating chocolate or junk food, few biscuits after dinner with tea, that's not a big deal. If the majority of your meals are sufficient protein, appropriate levels of carbohydrate, and a shit ton of fruits and veg, if you're doing that consistently, you're going to be nailing it there. For the majority of people, tracking won't even be necessary, because it's easier when you're eating these kind of hyperpalatable processed foods. It's easier to overconsume through mindless eating. It's very hard to overconsume and mindlessly eat when you're with lean protein sources and good quality fruits and vegetables, because they're just more satiating in their nature. So it's not that there's magical properties about them that you can't gain weight with eating these foods. It's just it's much harder to unconsciously overeat with them because they're much more satiating. So that's pretty much, if you can construct the majority of your meals with that approach, I think you're right on the way. And then also what I find important personally and with people I work with is identifying triggers. That's a big thing. And that's both within the foods. Is there certain foods that you eat that, they trigger a barrage of negative effects? So once you start eating them, you just can't control yourself. Well, maybe for a period until you're in a better place mentally or willpower wise, let's just eliminate those foods from diet. Why put that stress on you? Let's get rid of them, get them out of the house. But then also I know my personal situation, for my own nutrition, trigger times I think are a big thing. For example, I know if I'm looking to reduce body fat, looking to cut down or whatever it may be, my biggest area where I am susceptible to over consuming is when I come in from the gym and I'm cooking dinner. Now, I have, say, it takes me 25 minutes to cook dinner, or 30 minutes, whatever it may be. I have a trigger, you could say, or a habit that in that window, while I'm cooking dinner, I graze quite a lot. So I can eat quite a lot between little snacky things here and there while I'm cooking the actual dinner. So for me, that's where I tend to overconsume if I overconsume. So once I'm aware of that, order myself, right, that's where I overconsume. Let's put a plan in place. So you know that when you come in from the gym, you've 30 minutes to cook dinner and you tend to overconsume there through snacks and that. So let's maybe put in a standardized snack, be it a protein shake, a protein bar, piece of fruit, smoked salmon, whatever it may be, but a controlled snack. So right, for that 30-minute gap, there's a 200 calorie snack that's allocated, And we know that. So by you eating that, that satisfies that trigger that you're not consuming 400 or 500 calories through mindless grazing. And a lot of people have these trigger times. That's my personal one. For other people, it's when they're watching TV in the evening time, they overconsume without noticing. So if you can kind of be honest with yourself, identify that trigger and then put an actionable plan in place, that can go a long way then for people as well, I find, that are looking to manipulate their body composition.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And you're basically putting a control on it there, really, is all, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, no, fantastic.
Yeah, so we're not demonizing that action, and a lot of people will just try to restrain completely from it and blame themselves, and they say, "Oh, I'm this and I'm that, and oh, I'm a failure. I've no willpower. I'm always going to be fat," or they use these negative words towards themselves, it's negative emotion, but that only feeds into further kind of negative attitudes towards food and themselves. Where if you can be honest with yourself, right, that's where I overeat. Let's come up with a rational plan that I can put in place that's going to respect that. Because if it's, and it might be something you enjoy, when you watch TV in the evening, you enjoy actually eating something. And it mightn't be the fact that you think you enjoy a certain food. It might be just you like that habit. So you can either choose to try eliminate that habit or respect it and say, okay, I'm just going to make sure it's done in a controlled and sustainable way.
That's brilliant though. And I'm circling back a little as well. And on top of that, Dave, you mentioned about the 80-20 kind of guideline. I never like calling things rules as well. And it's something that we do implement with our own clients. And it gives you kind of something at least to even work towards if you want to. As you said, you can kind of use it as a weekly thing, or you could use it as a daily thing if you want. And it's to know that you can have that kind of wiggle room as such, if that's the way you look at it. You can have, some people look at it as moderation, some people look at it as being flexible. But at least you know you can have it, and it's not going to derail you from your goals. It's probably the biggest kind of eye-opener for people. But again, there's going to be a trade-off there. If you're having, let's say, less nutrient-dense foods and more higher calorie-dense foods, there's a trade-off of you getting in the nutrients you need from the other foods. So that's where you might start to, you might be low on energy. You might just feel not as fresh and bubbly every day. I know that's what happens for me. Like, it's very easy for me sometimes to... Like, for example, if I'm trying to put on weight, I know that the majority of people listening to this podcast are trying to lose it, but it's like I get pissed off when I talk about this stuff. But when I'm trying to put on weight, I find that because of such good habits around eating kind of to maintain my weight, or for a minute fat loss phase, I kind of turn into like this fucking fat loss ninja where I just find it easy and I tick boxes. But again, I have years of habits built up behind that, so it's not as easy as that for people, But I'm such in a routine with that. When I do try and eat more to put on weight, I struggle sometimes with actually getting the fucking food in until I sit down with myself and properly plan out my weeks and plan out my days. So I could start eating, a few more chocolate biscuits than usual, a few more donuts than usual, all these kind of really high calorie dense foods. And I do start to feel, quote unquote, shite, really, to be honest. So I know when to pull back and when to cop on with things. And it really is an individual thing as such. But I think the overall message that we're trying to get across here is majority of your day, good quality, whole, healthy foods. If you're nowhere near that, don't worry, because you can start to work towards that. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the pizza to veggie scale. I heard it years ago through a Dan John blog he shared it from another strength coach in the US. And I think I did a video on Instagram about it a few months back. But basically, Dave, what it is that, like, it's a sliding scale, and it's kind of like, right, if you're just think of one line, and one end you have pizza and one end you have veggies, if you look at that over the context of a diet, and if somebody's kind of pushing into the pizza end, we just want to slide them back a bit more towards the veggie side. Just as much that if somebody goes too deep into the veggie side, we want to pull it back a little bit to have that kind of balance there. So you're not going to the two extremes of one end, and you're finding that balance in the middle. I'm not saying the balance in the middle is smack in the middle of that, but it's a sliding scale, and it always will be. And that's probably one of the last points to wrap up this, is that nothing is going to be set in stone. Even the stuff you went through here today is a sliding scale with things, and it's not as easy as black and white, good and bad, healthy and unhealthy. And I think that's everything I have to say on the topic. Anyway, Dave, I think there's some fantastic stuff in there, but have you anything you want to wrap up that with?
Yeah, no, I think that's just what you were saying there. I think that scale, I have seen it before, and it's an important message. And even it's something I often say when I'm giving talks and that kind of thing, is you're not going to overhaul everything. Like, if I have an athlete or a person, and if they're eating pizza 2-3 times a week, if I can change that to half a pizza along. If I can replace half that pizza with just a side salad, and now they're eating 3 half a pizzas a week with 3 side salads, that's a big win for me. If I can get someone to consistently change that to weeks and months. If I have someone that drinks full sugar Coke 2 or 3 bottles a day, and I switch them to Diet Coke 2-3 bottles a day, that's a huge win if we can do that for weeks and months. So it's about taking those little wins where you can, those little modifications, because I think almost everyone that's listening at some stage has said, right, I'm going to get healthy and go cold turkey on everything, and then they're fucking miserable, they're hangry, they're grumpy, and also they don't sustain, because it's this all or nothing approach. And then once they do break it and have a biscuit, then they're like, oh well, look, this mentality that people are either on or off the plan, this needs to change. You should never be on or off a diet. It's all, as you said, it's dynamic, it's on a spectrum where these kind of things, because if you get into that mentality, right, I'm on a diet, and then you eat a biscuit you're not supposed to, well, now technically you're off the diet, you broke it, you're off your diet plan. And then it's just human logic, well, okay, well, I'm off it, I'll go back on it tomorrow, so that means I have 12 hours now where I'm off it. So I'm going to go absolutely crazy for this 12 hours and then overcompensate and just eat out house and home. Because, well, look, it's one night, I'm going back on it tomorrow. That's okay if it ever is actually one night, but it's never. You do the exact same thing 2-3 days later, and then all of a sudden in a given month where you were supposed to be on this diet plan, you've spent half it off the diet plan, and kind of. It's when you get yourself into that mental place of being on or off, all or nothing, that's a dangerous avenue to go down and rarely ends up in kind of, because again, it's cliche and you'll hear people saying it, but you need to eat in a way that you can see yourself eating 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And the biggest problem with weight loss, even anecdotally and from the research, what we see, losing the weight's the easy part. For most people, that's the easy part. It's weight regain in the 6-month period afterwards is where most people struggle. If you can keep the weight down and keep it down for about 6 months. So a lot of people plan on the weight loss, but don't plan beyond that. So say someone's looking to get down to whatever it is, they're in Slimming World and they're looking to get to 12 stone and that's their target weight. That's great. They have their plan on how to get there, but no one ever really thinks, okay, when I'm there, how's my plan to stay there? Am I going to just eat poverty amounts of calories all the time? Because when they get to the goal, right, I've done it, I'm off my diet again, I can just go back to the way you ate before that had you obese? That doesn't make sense. You're just going to end up back the same way. Continue dieting the way you are? Well, no, you're going to end up losing more than what you wanted. So this idea is like, yes, we put a plan in place to achieve that weight loss, but the weight loss is the easy part. That's just the beginning. We need to put a plan in place that allows us to transition that weight loss into weight maintenance and integrate it into our everyday lifestyle.
I think it sums it up pretty nicely though, Dave. One thing that you said there stuck with me. What was it?
Didn't stick with you too well.
No, it did. I'm thinking about biscuits now. Oh yeah, sorry. It's funny because the biscuit threw me off because I actually, before we came live on air, I was on Instagram for about 10 minutes doing a story, and I was showing how I had a chocolate biscuit while I was waiting for you, and I was saying how I was waiting for you, and I was showing how I don't have to eat the whole packet. It's not bad. So when I heard biscuit, it threw me off. But then you were saying about the context of the diet, how they're on and off a diet, and the diet, like your diet at the end of the day is what you consume daily. So technically, what you're saying is that I'm off a diet, so I'm not going to eat. So when people realize that, they're like, okay, yeah, it makes sense now. But I think we could probably go on in loads of different avenues, Dave, all day long, but there's some fantastic takeaways in there. And one thing I do want to round this episode off with is that we're nearly into November now, 2018. What would you say is the biggest lesson of this year so far for you, Dave? Doesn't have to be in context of what we just talked about. Could be anything.
For this year, for me, through different events that have occurred this year, I think the biggest lesson I've taken away from this year is to realize your priorities. And in terms of, for example, there was a period there for 4 or 5 months where I was training very inconsistently through other things that were going on, but I was happy to put training on the back burner. Training was not a priority for me in terms of powerlifting performance, but that's because there was other things going on personally that I prioritized above training. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned, it's okay I didn't allow training to regress. So my strength level, say if we look objectively from powerlifting, didn't regress, but I didn't make as much progress as I could have made. So I think it's okay to allow progress to slow down in certain areas of your life to allow growth in other areas. So for example, for a lot of people, it's okay to allow your training and athletic performance to take a backseat for a while in order to focus on progressing your business career or your professional career. It's okay to allow your training to take a backseat to be there as a support for people that are important in your life, or to work on and progress, be family relationship, romantic relationships, whatever it may be. So I think that idea that a lot of people that go to the gym and this kind of thing, they get self-obsessed and they place all their self-worth and self-value within what they can do in the gym and how to perform. I think that's a very bad place to get into. It's okay to, I suppose, you have your main priorities in your life, and for most people, say for example for me, it would be business, professional career, family, romantic relationship, and then you could say then the training and athletic side of things. So if there are three main priorities, they, like everything else, are dynamic, and where your priorities lie is not always going to be even. So sometimes it's okay to, the training takes a backseat because there are certain things going on business-wise or professionally that I need to focus on for the next couple of months. Or like that, it's like, okay, business, profession is tipping along nicely. Let's try and maintain that. We won't try dig ourselves into a hole to progress in professionally. We'll maintain where we are because we're going to work on relationships for the next while. So I suppose that's the biggest lesson I've taken away, is that, you know, your priorities change, and things that you think are important are probably not that important to you. Like, especially when it comes to training and gym performance, a lot of people think that's very important to them until something actually significant of importance happens and realize, like, yeah, Dad, I don't actually give two shits about the gym for the next while. I'm happy not to care about it. So you should never let your health sacrifice. And even in these times of high adversity and high stress, you can still maintain. It does not take much effort to maintain strength levels or maintain fitness levels, so that you can be in that emotionally mature place. You can say, right, for the next 3 months, I'm accepting I'm going to make no progress in the gym, but I'm not going to allow myself to regress. I'm going to maintain that because that takes minimal effort, and it allows me to put more effort into other development, other facets of my life. So I suppose that's the biggest lesson I've taken away from the past year.
It lets people know that it's okay to take a back seat-ish with things. So that you can, like, it's not like, as you said, you didn't go backwards, like, so I think that those periods have to be built in early anyway, Dave. You know, you have to have periods where you're not going fucking 100% the whole time. So, no, brilliant to hear it. Fantastic way to round things off. And, Dave, where can people find you? I know you changed, last time you were on, I think you were still with HP Advancements, your hashtags, or not your hashtags, your username has probably changed. I know I'll be putting it in the show notes anyway, but where can people find you if they want to follow you a bit more? So you can find me, the website is synapseperformance.ie, so over there you can find any resources and podcasts, that kind of thing. The podcast is the Synapse Performance Podcast. You'll find that on iTunes, Spotify. My Instagram, Synapse Performance, and then David Nolan on Facebook. If anyone wants to add me personally there, I tend to post a bit on my timeline and that kind of stuff. Brilliant. So Dave, I think we'll have you back on in the future sometime. Maybe we might make this an annual thing. Thank you very much, though, Dave. Some great insights there, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of takeaways for people in it. And thank you very much for coming on. My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me, Dave. So guys, that was David from Synapse Performance, and I think this is a massive episode, to be brutally honest. It's an episode that I can feel myself sharing with clients personally a lot, for them to understand kind of viewing food in certain ways, rather than kind of juggling back and forth in your head, being guilty after eating one food, thinking one's bad versus this, that and the other. So hopefully you've taken away a lot from it. It probably might lead to a second listen around, because there's a lot of information there, and sometimes you need to kind of be really focused in to make it stick. So if you found that certain things were, you brushed over important topics while you're listening to it in the car, on a run or a walk, don't be afraid to flick back over, because there's a massive amount of takeaways in this episode. All the show notes will be over on docfitnessonline/episode 24. And if you haven't noticed yet already as well, there's a whole new layout to the website. It's constantly being tweaked and updated. So hopefully you like the new layout. Should be smoother, should be faster, should be a bit more cleaner looking. And on the bottom of the show notes page as well, if you haven't downloaded the new guide that I've spent weeks putting together, it's called The Secrets to Losing Body Fat Without Giving Up Ice Cream. A bit of a bold name, but truly what is involved in that is the fundamental principles that you need to know, and then some very simple takeaways to get started with losing body fat. And this is stuff that should be fundamental knowledge, I believe, but isn't. And as a disclaimer, there is no secrets. But again, I'm bringing those kind of quote-unquote secrets to life for people and putting it into a little guide that you can download for free. So you can download it at the end of that show notes page on the podcast page if you haven't yet. So that's docfitnessonline/episode 24. If you just go over to the website, you'll find it there anyway. And if you don't already know as well, the podcast is now officially on Spotify. So that's another handy way if you're a Spotify user. And I leave it at that. As always, thank you for tuning in, and we'll chat to you next time. Bye-bye.